In a small, quiet town surrounded by green hills and wide open fields, there lived a woman named Clara. She wasn't someone people noticed much. Her life was simple, almost invisible to those around her. Every morning, she woke up early, made herself a cup of tea, and went about her day doing ordinary things. She baked bread for the local church gatherings, mended clothes for neighbors who asked, and tended to her tiny garden in the backyard. To most people, Clara seemed like just another face in the crowd, someone easy to overlook. Clara was in her late 40s, with soft gray hair always tied neatly into a bun. Her hands were calloused from years of work, but they carried a hidden grace that no one ever saw. If you passed her on the street, you might not think twice about her. She dressed plainly, spoke softly, and rarely drew attention to herself. But what no one knew was that behind closed doors, Clara had a secret, a passion she kept hidden from the world. Every evening, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the house grew quiet, Clara would sit at her old upright piano. It wasn't a fancy instrument. Its surface was scratched and some of the keys stuck if you pressed too hard. But to Clara, it was precious. For hours, she would lose herself in the music, her fingers gliding over the keys as though they had a mind of their own. She didn't need sheet music for the songs she played. They came straight from her heart. Each note told a story. Each melody carried a piece of her soul. Clara had been playing the piano since she was a child. Her mother, who had taught her the basics, used to say, "Music is how we talk to the world when words aren't enough." Those words stayed with Clara throughout her life. But as she grew older, she stopped sharing her gift with others. Life got busy, responsibilities piled up, and her piano became something she only touched in private. Over time, even her closest friends forgot that she could play at all. The town where Clara lived wasn't particularly exciting. Everyone knew everyone else, and routines rarely changed. Once a year, though, the community came alive for the annual Arts Showcase, an event organized by the local cultural society. This was the highlight of the year, drawing musicians, artists, and performers from nearby areas. People looked forward to it months in advance, buzzing with excitement about who might take part and what talents would be revealed. This year, however, the showcase carried extra weight. A famous maestro from the city had agreed to attend. He was known far and wide for his sharp critiques and high standards. Many hoped to impress him, dreaming of recognition or advice that could launch their careers. Auditions were held weeks ahead of time to decide who would perform, and competition was fierce. Only the best acts made the final cut. When Clara heard about the showcase, she hesitated. The thought of stepping onto a stage filled her with dread. What if people laughed? What if they didn't understand her music? Still, something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time to share her gift again. After days of deliberation, she signed up for the audition. No one expected her to make it through. When her name appeared last on the list of performers, many assumed it was out of pity. Clara didn't mind. She knew she wouldn't win any awards, but the idea of playing in front of an audience thrilled her in a way she hadn't felt in years. As the day of the recital approached, the town buzzed with anticipation. Posters hung in shop windows and conversations revolved around who would shine brightest under the spotlight. Clara tried to stay calm, practicing late into the night. She chose a piece she'd written herself, a hauntingly beautiful melody, inspired by the loneliness she often felt. It wasn't flashy or complicated, but it was honest. And honesty, she believed, was more important than perfection. On the morning of the recital, Clara woke earlier than usual. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple dress that made her feel comfortable rather than showy. As she walked to the venue, she noticed how busy the streets were. Families strolled together, children laughed, and vendors sold snacks outside the hall. The energy was infectious, but Clara's stomach churned with nerves. She reminded herself why she was doing this, not for fame or approval, but because music was a part of her and it deserved to be heard. The recital hall was already filling up when Clara arrived. Rows of chairs stretched across the room, decorated with elegant banners and twinkling fairy lights. A grand piano stood proudly on the stage, gleaming under the spotlights. Clara took a seat near the back, clutching her sheet music tightly. She watched as other performers rehearsed backstage, their confidence making her feel even smaller. Some were young prodigies with years of training. Others were seasoned musicians with trophies lining their shelves. Compared to them, Clara felt woefully inadequate. Still, she refused to let doubt consume her. Instead, she focused on the memory of her mother's voice saying, "Music is how we talk to the world." That thought gave her strength. She reminded herself that tonight wasn't about competing or proving anything. It was about sharing a piece of herself. And so, as the clock ticked closer to her turn, Clara sat quietly, waiting for her moment to step into the light. Little did she know, her performance would leave an impact far greater than she could have imagined. The maestro, seated in the front row with a stern expression, had no idea what was coming. Neither did the audience, chatting idly as they waited for the next act. Clara's name was announced almost as an afterthought, met with polite but distracted applause. She walked onto the stage, her heart pounding, and took her place at the piano. For a brief moment, everything else faded away. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys, ready to play the first note that would change everything. Clara's fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, trembling slightly. The spotlight above her felt heavy, as if it were pressing down on her shoulders. She could hear faint murmurs from the audience, people shifting in their seats, whispering to one another, and rustling programs. No one seemed particularly interested in what was about to happen. Clara took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her hands fall gently onto the piano. The first note rang out, clear and pure, filling the room like a single ray of sunlight breaking through clouds. For a split second, the chatter died down, not because people were paying attention, but because that one note was so unexpected, so perfect, that it demanded to be heard. Clara didn't pause. Her fingers moved smoothly into the next notes, weaving them together into a melody that was soft, yet powerful. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it carried something deeper, an emotion that reached straight into the hearts of those listening. At first, the audience didn't know how to react. Some glanced up briefly, thinking maybe this would be worth a few seconds of their time. Others continued talking, though quieter now, as if sensing they might miss something important. Even the maestro, seated in the front row with his arms crossed, leaned forward slightly. His expression shifted from boredom to curiosity. He tilted his head, studying Clara as though trying to figure out where this music was coming from. Clara played with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. She had practiced this piece countless times at home, but tonight it felt different. Every note came alive under her touch, each one telling a story she'd kept locked away for years. There was sadness in the low tones, hope in the higher ones, and a sense of longing that lingered between them. It was as though she were speaking directly to the room, sharing pieces of her soul without saying a word. As the melody grew stronger, the atmosphere in the hall changed. Conversation stopped completely, replaced by an intense silence. People sat up straighter, their eyes fixed on Clara. They weren't just hearing the music anymore, they were feeling it. A young girl in the front row clutched her mother's hand tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. An elderly man in the back nodded slowly, mouthing the words, "Beautiful," over and over again. Even the volunteers who had been walking around, serving drinks, froze mid-step, unwilling to break the spell. The maestro watched intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had judged hundreds of performances in his career, but this was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Clara's playing wasn't technically flawless. There were moments when her timing wavered slightly, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the raw honesty of her performance, the way she poured every ounce of herself into the music. It reminded him of why he fell in love with music in the first place. Not for perfection, but for connection. Clara reached the middle section of her piece where the tempo slowed and the notes became softer, almost hesitant. This part always made her think of lonely evenings spent staring out her window, wondering if anyone would ever truly see her. But instead of dwelling on sadness, She let the music transform it into something hopeful. Each note built upon the last, growing stronger and more confident until the entire room seemed to vibrate with energy. By now, everyone in the audience was captivated. Some leaned forward in their chairs, hanging on every sound. Others closed, their eyes letting the music wash over them. Even the stagehands, usually busy preparing for the next act, stood still, mesmerized. Clara felt their attention, but she didn't let it distract her. Instead, she focused on the story she wanted to tell. A story of resilience, of finding beauty in simplicity, of being seen after years of invisibility. As the final section approached, Clara's playing became bolder. Her hands moved faster across the keys, creating a crescendo that filled the hall with warmth and light. The music swelled, reaching a peak before gradually fading away, leaving only silence behind. When the last note hung in the air, it felt like the entire world held its breath. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, the spell broke. The first person to clap was the maestro. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and began applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The sound echoed through the hall, startling some in the audience who quickly joined in. Within seconds, the room erupted into thunderous applause. People cheered, stomped their feet, and called out "Bravo" over and over again. Clara sat frozen at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, unsure of what to do next. She hadn't expected this reaction. All she had wanted was to play her music, to share a small piece of herself with the world. Now, here she was, surrounded by a standing ovation from people who had barely noticed her existence moments ago. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, forcing herself to stay composed. Slowly, she rose from the bench and bowed deeply, her face flushed with emotion. The maestro stepped onto the stage, gesturing for Clara to join him. Reluctantly, she walked over, her legs shaky beneath her. He took the microphone and addressed the crowd, his voice steady but filled with admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have just witnessed something truly extraordinary. Music is meant to move us, to speak to our hearts, and tonight this woman has done exactly that." He turned to Clara, adding, "Thank you for reminding us all why we love music." Clara managed a small smile, overwhelmed by the praise. She returned to her seat backstage, her mind racing with thoughts. How had this happened? Just hours ago, she had been an ordinary woman, invisible to most. Now she was the center of attention, celebrated for doing something she loved. As the rest of the recital continued, Clara sat quietly, trying to process everything. She knew her life would never be the same after tonight, but deep down she also knew she was ready for whatever came next. Outside the hall, the town buzzed with excitement. People couldn't stop talking about Clara's performance, sharing their reactions and marveling at how such a simple woman had delivered such a powerful moment. Word spread quickly, and by the end of the night, Clara's name was on everyone's lips. Though she remained humble, she couldn't deny the joy of finally being seen, not for what others thought she should be, but for who she truly was. The days following the recital passed in a blur for Clara. She woke up the next morning expecting everything to feel the same, but it didn't. Her quiet little house, once filled only with the sound of her piano and the occasional hum of the wind outside, now felt different, charged with energy she couldn't quite explain. As she prepared her morning tea, she noticed something unusual. Her hands were still trembling slightly, not from nerves this time, but from the weight of what had happened. She replayed the performance in her mind over and over again. The way the audience had gone silent, the applause that followed, and the maestro's words of praise. It all seemed like a dream, too good to be true. By mid-morning, the first knock came at her door. Clara opened it to find Mrs. Thompson, her neighbor from across the street, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "I just wanted to say congratulations," Mrs. Thompson said, beaming. "We had no idea you could play like that. You were amazing." Clara accepted the flowers with a shy smile, unsure of what to say. She mumbled a quiet thank you and closed the door, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. But the visitors didn't stop there. Over the next few hours, more people came by. Some she knew well, others barely at all. Each one brought kind words, gifts, or simply a desire to hear her story. Word about Clara's performance spread quickly through the town. The local newspaper ran an article on the front page the very next day, calling her the hidden gem of the recital. The writer described how her music had moved the audience to tears and earned the admiration of the visiting maestro. Clara read the article with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was touched by the attention. On the other, she felt uncomfortable being put on a pedestal. She wasn't used to being the center of anything, let alone the talk of the entire community. Still, she couldn't deny the warmth she felt when strangers smiled at her as she walked down the street or when shopkeepers greeted her by name, something they'd never done before. As the week went on, invitations began arriving in her mailbox. There were requests for interviews, offers to perform at smaller events, and even a note from the mayor thanking her for bringing pride to the town. Clara sorted through them carefully, unsure of which, if any, to accept. Performing at the recital had been a leap of faith, but these new opportunities felt overwhelming. She worried that stepping into the spotlight might change her in ways she wasn't ready for. Yet deep down, part of her longed to share her music again, to see if she could recreate that magical connection with another audience. One evening, as Clara sat at her piano practicing, there was another knock at her door. This time, it was the maestro himself. Clara froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. She hadn't expected him to visit, especially not here in her humble home. When she finally opened the door, he stood there with a warm smile, his tall frame almost filling the doorway. "May I come in?" he asked politely. Clara nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. The maestro looked around the cozy living room, taking in the simple furnishings and the old upright piano in the corner. "This is where the magic happens, isn't it?" he said, gesturing toward the instrument. Clara laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. He pulled out a chair and sat down, motioning for her to join him. For a while they talked about the recital, how she had chosen the piece, what inspired her, and how she managed to capture such raw emotion in her playing. Clara answered honestly, sharing bits of her life she rarely spoke about, her childhood lessons with her mother, the years she spent playing alone, and the joy she found in creating music just for herself. Then the maestro leaned forward, his expression serious. "Clara," he said, "you have a gift. Not everyone can move people the way you did that night. And I believe your music deserves to be heard by more than just our small town." He paused, letting his words sink in. "There's a festival coming up in the city, a gathering of musicians and artists from all over the country. I'd like to invite you to perform there." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The thought of playing in front of thousands of people terrified her, but at the same time it excited her in a way she couldn't ignore. She hesitated, glancing at her piano as if it might hold the answer. I don't know," she stammered. "I've never done anything like that before." The maestro nodded understandingly. "I know it's a big step," he said. "But sometimes we need to take risks to discover who we really are. Trust me, Clara. Your music has the power to touch lives. Don't let fear hold you back." That night, after the maestro left, Clara stayed awake, thinking. She paced the room, her mind racing with possibilities. Could she really do this? Could she step onto a larger stage and share her music with the world? Or would she crumble under the pressure? She glanced at the piano, its keys gleaming faintly in the moonlight streaming through the window. Sitting down, she began to play softly, letting the melody calm her racing thoughts. The decision wasn't easy, but by morning, Clara had made up her mind. She would accept the invitation, not because she wanted fame or recognition, but because she realized her music meant something. It had already changed her life in ways she never imagined, and maybe it could do the same for others. With a sense of determination she hadn't felt in years, Clara wrote a letter accepting the maestro's offer. She sealed it carefully and placed it on the table, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. In the weeks leading up to the festival, Clara threw herself into preparation. She practiced tirelessly, refining her piece and experimenting with new melodies. She also started writing letters to friends and neighbors, inviting them to attend if they could. To her surprise, many promised to make the trip, eager to support her. Even Mrs. Thompson offered to organize a group outing complete with a bus ride to the city. Clara laughed at the idea, imagining her quiet little town descending upon the bustling urban scene. As the date of the festival drew closer, Clara felt a strange combination of nerves and anticipation. She packed her things carefully, choosing outfits that made her feel comfortable rather than flashy. On the morning of her departure, she stood at her doorstep, looking back at the house that had sheltered her for so long. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Taking a deep breath, she locked the door behind her and stepped into the unknown. When she arrived in the city, the scale of the event took her breath away. The festival grounds were alive with color and sound, filled with performers setting up stages and rehearsing last-minute details. Clara's name was listed on a large banner alongside other musicians, and seeing it there sent a shiver down her spine. She reminded herself why she was here, not for accolades but to share her music and connect with others. That thought gave her strength as she prepared for her performance. Backstage, Clara waited quietly, listening to the distant cheers of the crowd. The maestro visited her briefly, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this," he said, with a reassuring smile. "Just play from your heart like you always do." Clara nodded, gripping her sheet music tightly. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. The spotlight blinded her momentarily, but as she took her place at the piano, she felt a familiar calm wash over her. This was her moment, and she was ready. With a deep breath, she placed her hands on the keys and began to play, letting the music carry her and everyone else away. The festival stage was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. It was massive, with towering speakers on either side and rows of chairs stretching far beyond what she could see. Spotlights crisscrossed the darkened sky, casting golden beams that danced like fireflies. The crowd was a sea of faces, some illuminated by the glow of their phones, others leaning forward in anticipation. Clara took her place at the grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the bright lights. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the bench, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. She reminded herself why she was here: to share her music, not to seek perfection. When the first note rang out, it felt like time stopped. The sound was rich and full, echoing through the open-air venue and reaching every corner of the space. Clara closed her eyes, letting the familiar melody guide her. This piece, the same one she had played at the recital, now carried new meaning. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about connecting with the thousands of people sitting before her. Each note seemed to resonate deeper than before, carrying emotions that transcended words: sadness, hope, longing. They all flowed together, creating a tapestry of sound that wrapped around the audience. At first, the crowd was silent, almost hesitant. They weren't sure what to expect from this unassuming woman who had been introduced, simply as Clara, a pianist from a small town. But as the music unfolded, something shifted. People leaned closer, their expressions softening. A young couple near the front held hands tightly, swaying gently to the rhythm. An older man, in the back, wiped tears from his eyes, nodding slowly as if he understood exactly what Clara was trying to say. Even children, who moments earlier had been fidgeting impatiently, sat still, captivated by the haunting beauty of the melody. Clara poured everything she had into the performance. Her fingers moved across the keys with precision, yet there was an ease to her playing, a sense that she wasn't performing for the audience but sharing a part of herself with them. Every note told a story, of quiet evenings spent alone at her piano, of dreams she'd kept hidden for years, of the courage it took to step into the spotlight. And the audience listened, not just with their ears, but with their hearts. As the piece reached its climax, the energy in the air became electric. The music swelled, filling the night with a warmth that made goosebumps rise on arms and sent shivers down spines. Clara's body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face glowing with concentration and emotion. When the final note hung in the air, It lingered for what felt like an eternity. Then, silence. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the entire crowd was holding its breath, unwilling to break the spell. And then, the applause began. It started softly, almost tentatively, but quickly grew into a thunderous roar. People stood up, clapping wildly, cheering and whistling. Some even shouted "Bravo" over and over again. Clara sat frozen at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She hadn't expected this reaction, hadn't dared to hope for it. Tears welled up in her eyes as she rose slowly, bowing deeply to the crowd. The ovation continued, waves of sound crashing over her like ocean tides. From the wings of the stage, the maestro watched with a proud smile. He had known Clara's talent would shine, but even he hadn't anticipated the depth of emotion she would bring to such a large audience. As the applause showed no signs of stopping, he stepped onto the stage and approached Clara. "Take another bow," he whispered encouragingly. Clara hesitated, then did as he suggested, her cheeks flushed. With embarrassment and joy, the crowd erupted once more, their cheers louder than before. After the performance, Clara retreated backstage, her mind spinning with disbelief. Volunteers and organizers rushed to congratulate her, shaking her hand and telling her how moved they were by her music. Reporters asked for interviews, photographers snapped pictures, and strangers begged for autographs. Clara handled it all with grace, though inside she felt overwhelmed. She had always imagined herself as invisible, someone who blended into the background of life. Now she was surrounded by people who saw her clearly, for the first time perhaps, in her entire life. Later that evening, after the chaos had settled, Clara found a quiet spot near the festival grounds. She sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, the water shimmering under the moonlight. The cool night air helped calm her racing thoughts. She replayed the performance in her mind, marveling at how different it felt compared to the recital. There, she had played for a room full of neighbors. Here, she had played for strangers who didn't know her story, but somehow understood it through her music. It was humbling and empowering. As she sat there, a group of teenagers approached her shyly. One of them, a girl with curly hair and wide eyes, spoke up. "Excuse me, are you the pianist who played tonight?" Clara nodded, smiling gently. The girl's face lit up. "That was amazing. Your music made me cry. I've never felt anything like that before." Her friends nodded eagerly, adding their own compliments. Clara thanked them, touched by their sincerity. Before leaving, the girl handed Clara a folded piece of paper. "Can you sign this, please?" Clara unfolded the paper and saw it was a program from the festival. She signed it carefully, adding a small note of encouragement. "Keep listening to your heart. It will lead you to beautiful places." The teenagers beamed as they walked away, clutching the autographed program like a treasure. Watching them go, Clara realized something important. Her music wasn't just about her anymore. It belonged to everyone who heard it, touching lives in ways she couldn't predict. The next morning, Clara woke up to find her name trending on social media. Videos of her performance had gone viral, shared by attendees who wanted the world to experience what they had witnessed. Comments flooded in from people all over the globe, praising her talent and thanking her for reminding them of the power of music. Some wrote about how her piece had comforted them during tough times. Others said it inspired them to pursue their own passions. Clara scrolled through the messages, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had never imagined her music could reach so many people or have such an impact. Back home, her town buzzed with pride. Neighbors gathered at the local cafe to watch clips of her performance on their phones. Mrs. Thompson organized a welcome home party, complete with banners and balloons. When Clara returned, she was greeted by a parade of well-wishers lining the streets, cheering and waving. For someone who had spent most of her life blending into the background, it was surreal and deeply moving. Despite the newfound attention, Clara remained grounded. She continued her daily routines, baking bread, tending to her garden, and playing her piano late into the night. Fame hadn't changed her. If anything, it had strengthened her resolve to stay true to herself. She accepted a few more invitations to perform, choosing events that aligned with her values and allowed her to connect with audiences on a personal level. But she also set boundaries, ensuring that her music remained a source of joy rather than stress. One evening, as Clara sat at her piano, she reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. She thought about the recital, the festival, and all the people whose lives she had touched without even realizing it. She thought about her mother's words. Music is how we talk to the world when words aren't enough. Those words had guided her throughout her journey, leading her to moments she never could have imagined. Clara placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The melody was new, born from the whirlwind of experiences she had lived through. It was hopeful, yet tinged with nostalgia, a tribute to the past and a celebration of the future. As the notes filled the room, Clara smiled softly. She didn't need applause or recognition to know she had found her purpose. All she needed was the music and the courage to keep sharing it with the world. Months passed since Clara's performance at the festival, and life in her small town began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial excitement had faded, but the impact of her music lingered. People still talked about her triumph, often mentioning it during casual conversations at the market or church gatherings. Clara herself returned to her quiet routines, though now she did so with a renewed sense of purpose. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she sat at her piano, composing new pieces inspired by her journey. Her music had always been a private refuge, but now it carried an added layer of meaning, a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of others. Despite her return to simplicity, invitations continued to arrive in her mailbox. Some were for prestigious concerts in distant cities. Others were requests to speak at schools or community events. Clara sifted through them carefully, choosing only those that felt right. She accepted an invitation to perform at a charity gala supporting local arts programs, knowing how much such opportunities could mean to young musicians like herself years ago. She also agreed to visit a nearby school to share her story with students. Though public speaking made her nervous, she believed it was important to encourage others to follow their passions, no matter how hidden or overlooked they might seem. The day of the school visit arrived, and Clara stood nervously outside the auditorium, clutching a folder of sheet music. Inside, rows of children sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces bright with curiosity. As she walked onto the stage, a hush fell over the room. Clara introduced herself softly, explaining that she wasn't always known for her music, that for most of her life she had kept it to herself. Sometimes, she said, pausing to look at the wide-eyed students, we think our dreams aren't big enough or good enough. But I've learned that even the smallest spark can light up the darkest room. After her talk, Clara played one of her original compositions, a piece she called Whispers of Hope. The melody was gentle yet powerful, capturing both the struggles and joys of pursuing something deeply personal. As the final notes echoed through the auditorium, the children erupted into applause, their cheers filling the space with warmth. Several students approached her afterward, asking questions about how she learned to play and what inspired her songs. One boy, barely taller than the piano bench, shyly asked if he could try playing a note. Clara smiled and invited him to sit beside her. Together they pressed a key, its sound ringing out clearly. "See?" she said. "Anyone can make music if they let themselves." Clara's performances became fewer but more meaningful. She chose venues where she felt connected to the audience. Small theaters, community centers, and outdoor stages surrounded by nature. Each time she played, she reminded herself why she started. Not for fame or recognition, but because music gave her a voice when words failed. It was this authenticity that resonated with people. After one particularly moving concert, a woman approached Clara with tears in her eyes. "Your music saved me tonight," she whispered. "I didn't know I needed to hear it until I did." Moments like these reinforced Clara's belief that art could heal, not just individuals but communities. Back home, Clara noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with her. Neighbors who once nodded politely now stopped to chat, sharing stories of their own dreams and struggles. Strangers visiting the town specifically sought her out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman whose music had touched them online. Clara welcomed these interactions, finding joy in connecting with people from all walks of life. Still, she remained humble, quick to deflect praise and redirect attention to the universal power of creativity. "It's not about me," she would say. "It's about what the music makes us feel." One crisp autumn morning, Clara received a letter that brought her to tears. It was from a young girl named Emily, who lived in another state. Emily wrote that she had watched a video of Clara's festival performance and felt inspired to start taking piano lessons. Enclosed with the letter was a handmade card decorated with colorful drawings of musical notes and flowers. "Thank you for showing me that it's okay to dream big," Emily wrote. "I hope one day I can play like you." Clara held the card, close to her heart, overwhelmed by the realization that her actions had planted seeds of courage in someone else's life. As winter approached, Clara decided to host a small gathering at her home. She invited friends, neighbors, and anyone who had supported her along the way. The house buzzed with laughter and conversation as guests mingled, sipping hot cider and nibbling on homemade cookies. In the corner of the living room, Clara's piano stood ready, adorned with candles and garlands of evergreen. When the crowd quieted down, she took her place at the instrument and began to play. The melody was cheerful yet reflective, capturing the spirit of gratitude that filled the room. Everyone listened intently, clapping warmly when she finished. That night, as Clara closed the door behind the last guest, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her music had brought people together, not just as an audience, but as a community. Despite her growing confidence, Clara still faced moments of doubt. There were nights when she questioned whether she deserved the attention her performances had garnered. Was she truly talented, or had she simply been lucky? On those evenings, she turned to her piano for answers. Playing familiar pieces reminded her of the hours spent practicing alone, the sacrifices made, and the love poured into every note. She realized that success wasn't measured by applause or accolades. It was measured by the connections forged and the lives touched. Spring arrived, bringing with it fresh beginnings. Clara decided to collaborate with local artists on a project celebrating the town's culture and heritage. Painters, poets, and musicians came together to create an exhibition showcasing their work. Clara contributed several original compositions, each inspired by stories shared by residents. At the opening night, families wandered through the gallery, stopping to listen as Clara performed live. One elderly man approached her afterward, his eyes glistening. "That song you played, it reminded me of my childhood," he said. "Thank you for keeping memories alive." Clara nodded, humbled by the reminder that art could preserve histories as well as emotions. By summer, Clara's name had become synonymous with resilience and authenticity. Local newspapers referred to her as the woman who taught us to see beyond appearances, while teachers used her story to inspire students. Yet Clara remained unchanged at her core. She continued to live simply, finding joy in everyday moments. Her garden flourished under her care, bursting with blooms that mirrored her vibrant spirit. Evenings were spent at the piano, experimenting with new melodies and revisiting old favorites. One afternoon, as Clara practiced a tender lullaby, there was a knock at her door. Opening it, she found the maestro standing there, smiling warmly. He explained that he was passing through the area and wanted to check in on her. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and discussing the transformative power of music. Before leaving, the maestro handed her a small gift, a framed photo of her performing at the festival. Beneath it, he had written, "To Clara, whose music reminds us all why we fell in love with sound." Clara placed the frame on her piano, where it caught the sunlight streaming through the window. Looking at it, she felt a surge of gratitude for the journey she had taken, for the people who had supported her, and for the simple act of sitting down at the keys and letting her heart sing. Life hadn't turned out the way she expected, But perhaps that was the beauty of it. Every note she played was a reminder that even the quietest voices could resonate deeply, if given the chance. And so, Clara kept playing, trusting that her music would find its way to those who needed it most. Years rolled by, and Clara's life settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. She was no longer the invisible woman who blended into the background of her small town. Instead, she became a quiet beacon of inspiration, a reminder that greatness could come from unexpected places. Yet despite the changes in her circumstances, Clara remained true to herself. Her days were filled with simple joys, tending to her garden, baking bread for Sunday gatherings, and spending hours at her piano, letting her fingers explore melodies old and new. Though she performed less frequently now, Clara's music continued to reach people far beyond her hometown. Recordings of her pieces found their way onto playlists and streaming platforms, shared by listeners who discovered solace or strength in her compositions. Letters arrived regularly from strangers around the world, each one telling a unique story of how her music had touched their lives. Some wrote about overcoming grief. Others described finding courage during difficult times. Clara kept every letter, storing them in a wooden box beneath her bed. On quiet evenings, she would read through them, marveling at the ripple effect of something as simple as playing the piano. One day, while sorting through her mail, Clara came across an invitation unlike any she had received before. It was from a renowned conservatory in the city, asking her to serve as a guest mentor for aspiring musicians. The letter praised her authenticity and emotional depth, qualities they believed could inspire young artists to embrace vulnerability in their craft. Clara hesitated at first. The idea of teaching felt daunting, but ultimately, she accepted. If her journey could help even one person find confidence in their voice, she thought, it would be worth it. The conservatory was a grand building with towering pillars and polished marble floors. Students bustled about, carrying instruments and sheet music, their faces alight with ambition. Clara stood out among them, not because of her age, but because of her calm demeanor and unassuming presence. She walked slowly through the halls, taking in the energy of the place. When she entered the rehearsal room where she would meet the students, she saw a group of eager faces waiting for her. They greeted her warmly, though some looked skeptical. How could this quiet woman teach them anything groundbreaking? Clara began by sharing her story, not just the highlights like the festival performance, but also the struggles. She spoke about years spent practicing alone, doubting herself, and almost giving up on music altogether. I didn't think anyone would care about my songs, she admitted. But then I realized that music isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest. She paused, looking at the students. That's what I want to help you find, your truth. Over the next few weeks, Clara worked closely with the students, listening to their performances and offering gentle guidance. She encouraged them to play not for applause, but for connection. One student, a shy teenager named Anna, struggled to express emotion in her playing. Clara sat beside her at the piano, placing her hands lightly over Anna's. Close your eyes, she said softly. Think about something that matters to you. Let the music tell that story. Slowly, Anna began to play again, her notes softer and more heartfelt. By the end of the session, tears streamed down her face, not from frustration, but from relief. For the first time, she understood what it meant to let her heart guide her fingers. As the program drew to a close, Clara attended a showcase featuring the students' work. Sitting in the audience, she watched proudly as each performer took the stage. Their styles varied widely, from classical sonatas to experimental improvisations, but they all shared one thing: authenticity. Afterward, the students surrounded Clara, thanking her for helping them see their potential. Anna hugged her tightly, whispering, "You changed my life." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. These young musicians were carrying forward the lessons she had learned, proving that music's power was endless. Back home, Clara resumed her routines, content in the knowledge that her legacy extended beyond her own performances. She often thought about the ripple effect of kindness and creativity, how one act of courage could inspire countless others. Her mailbox continued to fill with letters, and her phone buzzed with messages from former students updating her on their progress. Each communication reminded her that her music had become part of a larger tapestry, woven together by shared experiences and emotions. One crisp autumn morning, Clara visited the local park where she used to walk as a child. The trees were ablaze with fiery reds and golds, their leaves crunching underfoot. She carried a small portable keyboard with her, setting it up on a bench overlooking the pond. As she began to play, passers-by stopped to listen. Some sat nearby, closing their eyes to absorb the melody. Others snapped photos capturing the serene scene. A young boy approached cautiously, his eyes wide with wonder. "Can I try?" he asked shyly. Clara nodded, guiding his tiny hands to the keys. Together, they played a single note, its sound echoing across the water. In the years that followed, Clara became a fixture in the community, not just as a musician but as a symbol of hope and perseverance. People sought her out for advice, comfort, or simply companionship. She never sought recognition, yet she couldn't deny the joy it brought her to know she had made a difference. Even as her hair turned fully gray and her hands grew slightly stiffer, she continued to play, finding beauty in every moment. On her 80th birthday, the town threw a celebration in her honor. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered in the park where a stage had been set up beneath twinkling string lights. Performances ranged from school choirs to professional musicians, all paying tribute to the woman who had inspired them. When it was Clara's turn to take the stage, she chose a piece she had composed recently, a reflection on gratitude and continuity. As the final note hung in the cool night air, the crowd erupted into applause, chanting her name. Clara bowed deeply, her eyes glistening with tears. Afterward, as she mingled with guests, someone handed her a scrapbook. Inside were photographs, letters, and mementos collected over the years, proof of the lives she had touched. Clara flipped through the pages, her heart swelling with emotion. There were pictures of her performing, drawings from children she had met, and handwritten notes from people whose paths she had crossed. At the very back, she found a letter written by the mayor, declaring her birthday Clara Day in the town. "For reminding us all of the beauty and simplicity and the power of staying true to oneself," it read. That night, as Clara sat at her piano, she reflected on her journey. From the lonely evenings spent practicing in secret to the stages that brought her standing ovations, every step had led her here, to a life rich with meaning and connection. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play, letting the music carry her thoughts into the darkness. It wasn't flashy or complicated. It was honest, just like her. And as the melody drifted through the open window, it seemed to whisper, a message to anyone willing to listen. Even the quietest voices can change the world.